Hi, Miss Brady. My name's right there. And I will be telling you about the Romanticism era. So, just a rough little preview as to what it was, and kind of still is this is officially when vampires and werewolves and anything found in the Vampire Diaries basically started becoming popular. So, the first topic that I will be talking about in the Romanticism era for political history and such is the French Revolution. Yeah. So, the French Revolution was this battle. It was basically the lower class rebelling against the upper class, because there was this huge dispute and unfairness between the classes. So the questions I will be answering are: what started the French Revolution? Why did it last for over 25 years? And what was life like post-war? Forgive me, but I am slightly sick, so bear with me. So, what started the French Revolution was that the country wanted to move towards a more ideal society, and where everyone was equal, but that never happened. And they were kind of towards the end / during the revolution, there was a reign of terror where radicals massacred and persecuted French aristocrats. So basically the lower class started killing and torturing the upper class. And this whole battle was kind of unfair because you had trained military soldiers from the upper class part, I guess, fighting against untrained peasants / poor civilians. So, it was already unfair to begin with, but hey, they tried. And then in 1812, kind of toward the end of the revolution-ish, Napoleon invaded Russia during the winter. Brilliant idea, man, just brilliant. And he lost many troops due to the cold because most of the troops got pneumonia, which is actually just a rapid change in body temperature, which, yes, you can get from being warm to cold. So, why did it last for over 25 years? So, France invaded the Netherlands in 1793, and Great Britain was like, hey, you can't do that. So then they decided to have a 25-year-long war with them. So for nearly all of those 25 years, all efforts at reform were suppressed because of the fear that reform would lead to anarchy as it had in France. So then a guy named William Pitt decided that he was going to propose the Act of Union, which was passed in 1801, which would basically create the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. So, what was life like post-war? The French Revolution had a major impact on the history of Europe. The Reign of Terror allowed Napoleon to gain more power, and he decided that he wanted to rule the world. But by the time that peace was restored in 1815, life was so different from before the revolution that Europe was placed into a period of revolutionary change. So also post-war, there were a lot of post-war tensions that kept building up between the classes. And so the Luddite riots were during George IV's reign, which is, he's the son of George III, which is the king, old Mad George, the king that went insane. And there was actually a lot of economic depression during that time in a lot of countries, actually. But what happened was unemployed factory workers decided that they were going to go in and take, mallets and stuff and, destroy the machines that stole their jobs from them. Another pretty devastating thing that happened was the Peterloo Massacre in 1819. And again, it was because of all those post-war tensions. And 11 people were killed when troops were sent to break up a workers' gathering in St. Peter's Field, Manchester. It was called Peterloo as a bitter pun on Waterloo, because they wanted to make a joke out of the war. Alright, so now I'll be talking to you about the Act of Union, but before I go into that, I want to explain this picture. So, you have the flag of England, which is the red plus sign. The first part of the Act of Union combined England and Scotland, which Scotland is the white X with blue triangles. They combined that and made the original Union flag, seen here. Well, then they decided that flag, along with the Ireland flag, when they combined England and Scotland, or Great Britain / England and Scotland, with Ireland to create this flag, which is known as the Union Jack, or just the English flag, or the British flag, or the really cool looking flag. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. And that's how the United Kingdom was formed. So, the questions that I will be answering are, what did the Act of Union do? Why was it created? And what was Ireland's response? But before I do that, this is Ireland. Right? This is Scotland. And this is England. Just so you know locations and everything. So, what did the Act of Union do? So, Ireland was to be joined with Great Britain to form the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. The Dublin Parliament was done away with, and Ireland was to be represented at Westminster. The Anglican Church was to be recognized as the official Church of England. Free trade between Ireland and Great Britain. Ireland was to be responsible for 2/17 of the general expenses of the United Kingdom. Ireland got to keep its own courts of justice and civil service. No Catholics were permitted to hold public office, and there was to be no Catholic freedom. It's pretty harsh. So, why it was created was rebellious Irishmen, encouraged by the promise of French assistance, rose up against their British rulers. So, Ireland had a king, and they didn't want to have that king anymore. So, they kind of joined up with England to get rid of that king. And they did. And so then they were allies, but then somehow England got control over Ireland. And then the Irish were not happy about that because they just got rid of one king. because the whole point was they didn't want a king. So they had just gotten rid of a king, and now they're getting put under the rule of another one, neither of which they liked. So then France was like, hey, we'll help you with your rebellion as long as you help us by getting back at England. You know the whole, the end of me of my enemy is my friend? Yeah, the French are really, really well versed in that. So then Great Britain was scared of a threat of French invasion by way of Ireland, because it really wouldn't be hard to get over to Ireland, well, over to Great Britain from Ireland, even though technically it would be easier just to go straight from France, but whatever. Because, I mean, look right here. Right here. That's like probably a mile across, if not more. But it's a really short distance that can be done in a rowboat. So it wasn't hard. So Ireland again was not too happy about having another king. But they were like, "Hey, we're getting equal representation as the other country, which is Scotland." So they're kind of happy about that. And then the act was actually passed. Well, the Union turned out to be a political expedient in wartime, solving none of the grievances in Ireland over land, religion, economy, or politics. The act did, however, increase the sense of grievance in Ireland. Note the sarcasm. The act became a liability rather than an asset. The threat to the status quo and potential violence against Catholics stopped full Catholic emancipation and ended all of William Pitt's intended reforms. So, this third section that I'll be talking about is the policies and political events. The picture is of George IV, which I have mentioned earlier. That is what he looks like, according to this painting. And this is George III, who kind of looks like Donald Trump. Yeah, so the questions that I will be answering are: what policies were put into place? Why did George III, the guy in the picture, go insane? And what were the major bills and what happened during them? So, the policies that were put in place were the Corn Law, which kept cheap foreign grain from taking over the market. So, the Tory government passed the Corn Law, which taxed imported grain. Back then, the word corn applied to all grain. They also adopted the doctrine of laissez-faire, or it's the French way of saying it, laissez-faire, which means allow to do. And it basically means that the economy works best without government intervention. And that's actually not true, because America decided to adopt laissez-faire in the 1920s. And then we had the Great Depression in the 30s. Great Britain also abolished slave trade in 1807. George III, the guy who looked like Trump, was declared insane, and George IV, about 2 pictures ago, was named Prince Regent in 1811. The Catholic Emancipation Act freed Catholics from many restrictions in 1829, and the first reform bill extended voting rights to middle class, that is supposed to say men, but affected only 5% of the population in 1832. Now, this is another picture of George III, one where he's much younger and does not yet look like Trump. Now, in a lot of nursery rhymes and other things, he is referred to as Old Mad George or Mad King George, because he went a little crazy. Now, historians like to put George III's madness down as a genetic blood disorder called porphyria, or porphyria. Not quite sure how to pronounce that. However, a research project based at St. George's, University of London, has concluded that George III actually suffered from a mental illness known as bipolar disorder, which is more common than most people think. So, George III would suffer frequent episodes of mania, or the manic state of mood disorders, which also matched contemporary descriptions of his illness by witnesses, and occasionally he would suffer from violent convulsions that looked like he was being possessed, and his servants had to sit on him, literally sit on him, to keep him safe on the floor. I kind of wish there was a painting of them sitting on him, but you can't have everything. So, George III would write journals or letters or a diary or something, I don't know. But he would write something, and the study that I had previously mentioned had collected samples of his writing. Well, a sentence containing 400 words and 8 verbs is not unusual. However, George III, when in his mania stage, or when during a mania episode, he would often repeat himself, kind of like my grandma does a lot, and his vocabulary became more complex, creative, and, for lack of a better word, colorful. This evidence can be seen today in the writing and speech of patients during the manic phase of bipolar disorder. And mania is at one end of the spectrum of mood disorders, with sadness or depression at the other, as illustrated by the picture to the right. I'll let you just look there for a minute. So, one of the major battles in this time period, or, well, in the French Revolution, really, was the Battle of Trafalgar. Now, according to History.com, in the 5 hours of fighting, the British devastated the enemy fleet, destroying 19 enemy ships. No British ships were lost, but 1,500 British seamen were killed or wounded in the heavy fighting. The battle had fought most of its rage around the Victory. I'm assuming that's this one. Right here. It's there. Where a French sniper shot Horatio Nelson in the shoulder and chest. The admiral was taken below and died half an hour before the end of the battle. So, during the Battle of Trafalgar, the British fleet was under the command of Admiral Horatio Nelson. You know, the one who was shot in the shoulder and the chest and died 30 minutes before the end of the battle, which I just said. And he defeated a combined French and Spanish fleet known as the Battle of Trafalgar, which was fought off the coast of Spain. Fun fact, there is now a town square in London called Trafalgar Square, where most of the celebrating during VE Day in London after World War II was celebrated. That's where the party was on that day. November 11th. The 11th hour, the 11th day, the 11th month. Sorry, just a fun little history fact there. And Horatio Nelson's last words when informed of soon coming victory was, "Now I am satisfied. Thank God I have done my duty." The other major battle, and probably one of the more well-known, was the Battle of Waterloo. The Battle of Waterloo took place in Belgium on June 18th in 1815 and marked the final defeat of French military leader and emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon led his army of some 22,000 troops against the 68,000-man British army, which had taken up position south of Brussels near the village of Waterloo. Now, keep in mind, Napoleon had 72,000 troops, which means there were more than just 72,000 men. The British army only had 68,000 men. Napoleon still lost. That says something, doesn't it? The French suffered more than 33 casualties, while British and Prussian casualties numbered more than 22,000. The picture is actually of a reenactment. I thought it looked pretty cool, so I decided to use it. Here's my bibliography. Yes, there are a lot of sites. I had a lot of pictures and a lot of research. Feel free to really quickly just browse through it. I'm just going to leave it here for a minute. None of you are reading it, are you? Figured.